Hello and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris. Welcome to Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. Last month, Israel announced it was going to ban 37 aid organizations, including Doctors Without Borders, from operating in Gaza, the occupied West Bank and occupied East Jerusalem beginning March 1st. Now, joining us on the show today to tell us more about what's the latest with this situation, I have with me Simon Eccleshall, who is the head of programs for Doctors Without Borders Australia, also known by its French acronym MSF. Simon, welcome to the show. It's good of you to join me. Thank you so much. Talk to me about the latest ban, the Israel's ban on the 37 aid groups. It was supposed to be enforced March 1st, but we're a few days away after that. What's the latest situation with that now?
Well, as you're aware, the politics and conflict has taken a bit of a turn in the region, and so there hasn't been a hard and fast deadline as we were expecting around the deregistration of those 37 international non-government organisations in Gaza. The reality on the ground is still that we work under incredibly limited access and frustrating conditions, and we expect that will probably continue as we continue as humanitarians to negotiate for proper access and to continue to ask states all around the world to put pressure on Israel to allow these 37 NGOs to continue delivering life-saving assistance in Gaza, the West Bank and in West Jerusalem.
Right. So the Israeli authorities, they say the ban is linked to aid groups refusing to provide detailed personnel information about Palestinian stuff. I'm quite curious, what kind of information were they requesting? And why did MSF decide not to comply with it? What were the risks you were concerned about?
Yeah. Let's start by understanding that this request is historically, and if we look at other contexts around the world, it's pretty unreasonable. Humanitarian organisations work in close alignment with international humanitarian law. We're protected under the UN charters and the roles around providing that relief through unfettered access. So what the occupying power Israel has asked of us in Gaza, where we have an agreement with the Palestinian authorities to be able to continue to work in Gaza, the Israelis have asked us to provide the personal identifiable information for our staff that are working in Gaza. We normally don't provide that information anywhere we work, but we do make a big effort to cooperate with all parties in a conflict and to be able to reassure ourselves of their respect for our mandate and our role. What's been problematic in this context is that the Israelis have made this conditional, this sharing of personal identifiable information about our staff. They've made that conditional on our continued presence in Gaza. And so whilst we've cooperated for many months with the Israeli authorities on the whole process of registration, and we've provided all of the other information required, this has become a sticking point. Thankfully, the latest news on this is that the Israeli High Court issued last Friday an injunction stopping the banning of the 37 NGOs. It's a temporary injunction, and it's yet to be seen how the Israeli government will react to that injunction. But through a legal challenge supported by those 37 NGOs, we've been able to highlight the irregularity or the unreasonableness of that request by the Israeli government. So we have some hope from within Israel, this time from within the legal channels, that this debate might have a bit more of a robust conclusion and that there's still space to negotiate access.
I can't imagine the difficulty it must have caused the organization to come to that decision.
Yeah.
That's not an easy decision to make, I'm sure. But, it being unfair, a situation to have been put into that in the first place. But talk to me a little bit about what that means. So right now you're operating in the territories that require the most support, the most help, but it's uncertain. You're on uncertain ground, waiting for maybe the Supreme Court or maybe for tensions to ease in other parts of the region. Is it very precarious, the situation? How do you plan for something like that?
That's the sticking point. It's very hard to plan your next move. What we do know, though, as MSF, is that we will continue. We will try whatever way we can to continue to support Palestinian people in need in Gaza. The form that might take may change, and we'll have to look for what opportunities present, particularly around the supply of life-saving humanitarian assistance. Our own trucks, those of many NGOs, have been blocked for several months. We're looking at what other opportunities might be available for us to get those life-saving support, those needs into Gaza, those items. We're looking at personnel. So we've been unable to get international staff issued new visas from the Israeli authorities to travel into Gaza. We have staff on the ground now who will leave when their visas expire or when they can no longer extend. But what it will mean is that we'll have to work more remotely in supporting the vast majority of our staff in Gaza. So we have, I think, 1,200 staff in Gaza. Over 1,000 of those are Palestinian staff. So the number of international staff was always a small part of our overall presence. It will become perhaps even more small or under more pressure if this deregistration issue continues. We are hopeful that there may be some sort of negotiated settlement where we're able to continue to work. What form, how we work may need to change, but we're optimistic that the needs are so huge that the needs and the wants of Palestinians are for MSF to continue. We provide a critical health service in Gaza. Currently, 1 in 5 hospital beds is supported by MSF. 1 in 3 child deliveries is supported by MSF. We're providing drinking water to over 100,000 people every day. If you took that out of the equation, it would be catastrophic for people in dire need. And we're appealing to the Israeli government and we're appealing to states all around the world to allow that assistance to continue and to scale up that assistance. What we have at the moment is not enough. We need to actually provide a lot more assistance in the coming months to ensure that people are able to survive in what is still a horrible humanitarian crisis.
Yeah, so talk to me about that. You mentioned limited access trucks, aid trucks being blocked. Are there areas of Gaza now that are completely inaccessible to medical and humanitarian teams? And are you concerned that should the deregistration go through, which parts of Gaza will be inaccessible?
So inaccessibility to areas is perhaps less of a concern after the ceasefire. So what we saw with the adoption of the ceasefire was a significant increase in armed hostilities, particularly the aerial bombardments or the moving of people out of particular areas and the carpet bombing or blanket destruction of neighbourhoods that we've witnessed all throughout last year and the year before. With the ceasefire, we're still seeing casualties present at medical facilities every day. They're typically people with gunshot wounds who've approached what's called the yellow line or the yellow zone, which is the line that the Israeli Defense Force maintains as they are meant to be under the ceasefire, withdrawing from Gaza. The reality is that line is changing every day. We're seeing it expanding, and the uncertainty around that area is leading to more casualties. So people who may be trying to access their agricultural lands and were unaware that they are in a yellow zone are approaching the Israeli controlled areas and are being targeted. So it's that confusion around where is safe to go, where is not safe to go. How do I provide for my family if I'm a Palestinian and I can't farm my agricultural land? And we're seeing that playing out during the ceasefire in ways that add to the suffering of Palestinians and the complexity. Returning to the issue you raised about the trucks coming in, so we have seen under the ceasefire an increase in the number of trucks coming across at the border posts, but it's not our trucks, it's not the humanitarian sector trucks. Our trucks are still held on the Israeli side of the border as they have been for many, many months. MSF has 45 trucks still waiting to be cleared to bring in life-saving medical supplies. What is coming in are trucks that are serving the shops and the commercial operations, which are now starting to come back inside Gaza. It's great that there's some economic activity, but for MSF, we're concerned that the types of goods coming in are not the right ones. For example, food. What we're seeing coming in is highly processed food that gets sold in shops, rather than meat, vegetables, fruit that is needed for children who are suffering from malnutrition. And the food that's coming in is coming in for sale, not for humanitarian supplies, which are provided free of charge to those who are most needy.
Right.
So there's some distortion in the figures. Israel could claim that there's a lot more items coming in, but when you look at what those items are and where the needs are, you get a very different picture of what the situation is on the ground in Gaza.
Yeah. I've spoken to several MSF representatives, many of whom who have been on the ground in Gaza
Yes.
Providing services, and they spoke of many limitations and the need for creativity with all the shortages of humanitarian aid being allowed. Do you know what the situation is now? Is it getting better in terms of having some of the the medicine and the tools needed to provide some of the, I can only assume, a backlog of injuries that need to be treated during the ceasefire?
Sadly, no, we're not seeing an improvement in those items that relate to the work that MSF supports.
Yeah.
So even the most basic medical supplies, dressings for wounds, scalpels for surgery, painkillers, antibiotics, those are part of those items that are not allowed in, be they humanitarian items or be they what the Israelis call dual-use items.
Antibiotics is not allowed in?
Antibiotics that we are requesting is stuck at the border. It's not allowed in.
Okay.
So what we find at the moment, and this has been one of the heartbreaking realities for MSF staff working in Gaza, is that we're performing surgery without painkillers. The people are not getting the right medications, including antibiotics, to be able to fight off infection. So those items which would be normally part of everyday medical care are not available. And as you mentioned also, the type of needs that people have are a mix of trauma-related injuries. So last year in particular, when the bombings were occurring, we saw a lot of burn injuries, we saw a lot of crushed bones. Now with the ceasefire, we're seeing less of that, but we're still seeing people present with gunshot wounds, again, as they're being targeted for being in the wrong area at the wrong time or indiscriminately shot at when going about their everyday lives. We're also seeing complications from people who've had chronic illness but been unable to seek and receive treatment for many, many years now. And there's also no pathway for those people to be able to go out, seek medical attention and then come back in.
No medical evacuations?
Medical evacuations have been a slow trickle. There are thousands and thousands of people on the wait list. Many people may succumb to those illnesses before that backlog will be cleared. I've heard estimates of at current rates it would take 10 years to clear the backlog. So again, that's become an issue not because of a lack of capacity. There's incredible medical capacity in the region. MSF has got a rehabilitation hospital in Amman, Jordan, that could take people. It's political will that's lacking. It's the lack of trust and support for humanitarian actors to be able to deliver that support in Gaza and outside of Gaza. And what we see very clearly in Gaza is still the weaponization of food, the weaponization of humanitarian aid, the restriction of access to medical care as a means of collective punishment for the Palestinian people. And these are the things we object to on the basis of international humanitarian law. These are the things we think states should be shouting out about more loudly at international fora and demanding a change, demanding action.
Right. Before we do get into the international forum, the international community and what they can do more of in terms of support. You talked about the yellow line a bit earlier. I'm curious to know more. I watched a video that MSF, footage from MSF staff on the ground to depict the yellow line, and it was so different from what I had imagined. I pictured clearly demarcated barricades and to show that this is where you can and cannot go, but actually it's just a yellow box or a yellow stone rock painted yellow on the without kind of clear lines as to what is a no-go zone and what is not. Maybe you can tell us more about how this line affects civilians and the types of injuries that you're seeing, that you're treating on the ground.
Sure. So again, under the conditions of the ceasefire, the Israeli Defense Force was meant to progressively withdraw from the territory. And the yellow line was envisaged as a key border or barrier to be put in place during this phase of the ceasefire. It is, as you describe, concrete blocks painted yellow, which despite the intent to make it a fairly fixed line, what we're experiencing on the ground is that it moves. It's regularly adjusted by the IDF. It's been progressively expanding westward. So it started from, I think, 1.5 kilometres inside the eastern border of the Gaza Strip, and in various places it's now being moved to accommodate what can only be anticipated are the strategic or security concerns of the Israelis.
So pushing Gazans closer to the coast.
Exactly. Pushing Gazans closer to the coast, reducing the amount of land that they have free access to, and importantly, blocking them from key agricultural land. Again, part of the recovery of Gaza, part of the ceasefires is to allow Gazans to return to their homelands and to be able to start engaging in livelihoods, farming, for example. And that's where some of the confusion has come in, that people thought they had access to those agricultural lands. They weren't aware perhaps that the yellow line, the boundary had changed, and when they're trying to reach those lands, they're being targeted by the IDF, who suspect that they may be not civilians, they may be someone else. Again, it's a very confusing, a very opaque situation there that is very hard to ensure the safety of Palestinians or of our staff. So approaching the yellow line is really something that should be avoided at all costs. Again, that has for our staff been evidenced through the number of casualties we're seeing with gunshot wounds. So we're seeing women, children and men presenting at medical facilities with gunshot wounds as a result of them being in proximity to that yellow line.
Right. Since the ceasefire, or despite the ceasefire, I might say, UNICEF came out with a report that more than 100 children had been killed since early October, and I think that corroborates your testimony that there are shootings and injuries and fatalities still occurring regularly. How are the staff, how are your Palestinian staff operating? How have they been surviving through all of this personally and professionally? Yeah. I understand you've lost a few staff.
We have MSF throughout the course of this recent escalation in the conflict since October 7, 2023. MSF has lost 15 of our staff. Those staff were killed on the job when they were working in medical facilities, when they were en route, when they were being transported using ambulances, etc. So there's been a pattern of attacks on medical facilities and medical personnel beyond MSF staff, all medical personnel within Gaza. That is at an unprecedented level. We've never ever before seen the level of casualties for aid workers and medical personnel in a humanitarian context that we've seen now in Gaza. And that relates directly to the targeting, the destruction of buildings that contain medical facilities, the buildings where we work, that are normally protected under international humanitarian law. One of the things that MSF does wherever we work is share the coordinates of the places where we work with the parties to a conflict to ensure that they're clear on what is a hospital, what is a medical clinic. And what we've seen in Gaza is that despite providing those coordinates, that information to the armed actors, that repeatedly over the last 3 years now, we've seen attacks on medical facilities and direct casualties as a result of that. So that is one of the challenges that we face. The psychological impacts that has on our staff are dire. When you take away the only protections that they thought they had, that they would be protected by international humanitarian law, that working for an organisation like MSF would afford them some protection, that's been sadly eroded in Gaza. And what we're seeing now is that staff are exhibiting the impacts of long-term psychological harm. We have children, parents who are traumatised by what they've seen, and as a result of the destruction of the health system, we don't have anywhere near the amount of capacity to provide mental health services to Palestinians. It often goes as one of the hidden dimensions of a conflict is the mental health crisis. And what we're seeing through the limited number of interventions that we can do around mental health, psychosocial first aid, and helping people who've dealt with incredible loss, is that this is having a marked impact not only on the individuals but on Palestinian society.
Which is why I really commend MSF for standing up and standing your ground and not providing the personal information of your Palestinian staff to the Israeli authorities, despite facing the threat of deregistration. You mentioned the destruction of the health system in Gaza. Has there been an opportunity to rebuild what has been annihilated in the past several years?
We don't see any large-scale rebuilding as yet. We are repurposing buildings that are functional where possible. We still are using field hospitals and tents to run a lot of the services. As you're aware, the absolutely widespread destruction of the built environment in Gaza has created a whole lot of hazards. And we see people today trying to live in a makeshift shelters built out of the rubble of the buildings they previously called home. In winter, when it's raining, with the spread of disease, without sanitation, without electricity, all of those things compact the impacts on people's health. They combine to create an absolutely horrific environment for people to try and survive in. So no, those hospitals, where possible, we're trying to rebuild slowly capacity on the sites where the previous hospitals were to make sure that they're not repurposed for other uses. We're looking at trying to locate our services near where people want to go back, where they want to go back to their homes. We want to be located where people are going to be, not where the Israelis want us necessarily to locate for their own political or commercial interests. So there is a challenge there around giving agency to Palestinians to be able to determine where our future services should be, where they will rebuild. That as yet is not really happening. The clearance of rubble will take a very long time, and then disputes over the purpose and the use of that land will be another element under the ceasefire that will be challenging for Palestinians.
You mentioned several times during our conversation the IHL, the International Humanitarian Law, and the hope still that it will prevail. Is there still hope despite it being blatantly ignored and the weaponization of aid being thrown in our faces and on our screens these past few years?
You have to hold on to hope when hope is all you've got left. And we're seeing that very much as an important part of how we communicate our mission to Palestinians. We're not giving up. We recognize that international humanitarian law has been devastated. It's been eroded substantially by what we've seen take place in Gaza. And we're appealing to responsible states around the world, moderate states, to ensure that Gaza becomes a short-lived exception around international humanitarian law abuses, not the new norm. We want to further strengthen international humanitarian law. We want to protect the hard-fought negotiations over decades to create laws that ensure that atrocities don't happen in the future. It saddens all of us around the world to see what's happening in Gaza, and we recognize that a lot can be prevented if states will, and parties to a conflict will, respect humanitarian laws. These are the foundations of humanity. These are the values and principles that we all share that transgress all our faiths, all of our beliefs. And if we can't agree on that, there's nothing really we can agree on. So we're holding on to it with great determination, and we need states, including the government of Malaysia, to be one of those strong voices advocating for international humanitarian law.
You're right, we can't give up hope. We have to tell the Palestinians we are not giving up hope. Would you have a message for us in the couple of minutes that we have left, a message for our audience that you may want them to know regarding the situation in Gaza, the work that you're doing, the urgent need to support the work?
You've said it for me largely there, but if I
didn't mean to take the message away from you.
If I was to rephrase that, I think we have to create a feeling, a mindset around Gaza that is based on hope, that is based on the ability of people like your viewers to be able to make a difference. at times where we witness the actions of states being outside of what we think should be the norm or what we think would be responsible action by a state, the responsibility then falls to us, that we have to let our concerns known. We have to approach our leaders, we have to inform our leaders that this is not good enough, that we demand that there's greater action to protect humanity and to take the right decisions, irrespective of what we see happening now with a broadening conflict in the Middle East. We have to stand up and speak up about this. And that's really who MSF is. We're an organisation that is a medical humanitarian organisation, but we were founded by doctors and journalists with a commitment to speak out, that we weren't going to be quiet about witnessing humanitarian atrocities, that we were going to do whatever we could to raise awareness and to demand that people take action. And that's the conviction I want us all to take forward, that it falls on us, our generation, to make a difference here.
Yeah, to bear witness, right? Yeah. Thank you so much for your time, Simon. It's been such a joy talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Melisa.
That's all the time we have for you on this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris, signing off for the evening. Thank you so much for watching. Good night.